Welcome to the Every Learner Everywhere Putting Equity into Practice webinar series for 2024. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Norma Hollebeck, and I'm the Senior Manager for Network Programs and Services with Every Learner Everywhere. Before I introduce our network partner and guests for today's webinar, I'd like to take out just a few minutes to tell you a little bit about Every Learner Everywhere and the mission of our network. Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of higher education organizations with the expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, and measuring the efficacy of digital learning and its integration into pedagogical practice. Every Learner Everywhere is sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and here at Every Learner Everywhere, we work with colleges and universities to build capacity among faculty and instructional support staff to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to help institutions use new technology to innovate teaching and learning with the ultimate goal of increasing student success, especially for first-generation college students, poverty-impacted students, and racially minoritized students. As a quick housekeeping note, throughout the presentation, we welcome your questions in the Q&A section located at the bottom of your screen. If participants raise their hands, however, we will not be able to unmute you. We will be monitoring the Q&A section as well as the chat. And now I'm going to hand it over to our network partner for this session, Ray Keith, Associate Director for Achieving the Dream. Ray?
Thank you, Norma. Excited to be here with you all in our third session. We're going to be focused on open pedagogy, and we'll introduce you to our equity-minded digital learning guides that will share strategies in ways that you can implement open pedagogy in your courses. And I'll turn it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Dr. Michelle Hampton, and I'm a business administration professor at Cuyahoga Community College in Cleveland, Ohio. I am also an ATD consultant.
Hi, everyone. Great to see some returning participants and some new participants. I'm Sarah Kinnison, Associate Director of Program Development with Achieving the Dream.
We definitely want to acknowledge our partners, Every Learner Everywhere, in this work together, and also wanted to recognize Norma, who is doing our technical background work, and appreciate your support in this effort. And so I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists. We have April Crenshaw, who's an associate professor of mathematics. She brings 19 years of experience in higher education and K-12 education. She's an award-winning educator, having received national recognition twice for her innovative and inclusive teaching practices that engage students. She's currently serves as the Open Education Conference Board of Directors to champion open education as a driving force for promoting fairness, innovation, and transformative change in education. And welcome, April. And then we have Joshua Nave. He is the Title III Project Activities Director at Southwest Tennessee Community College in Memphis, Tennessee. He has 18 years of experience as a Spanish instructor, having taught at Coahoma Community College, Miami University of Ohio, the University of Memphis, and is currently an adjunct instructor of Spanish at Southwest Tennessee Community College. He is committed to professional development and collaboration, which has led him to serve in leadership roles in Mississippi Foreign Language Association and as a board member of the Tennessee World Language Teaching Association. Welcome, Joshua.
Land acknowledgement. Every Learner Everywhere's office in Boulder, Colorado is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Apache, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Comanche, Kiowa, Pawnee, Shoshone, Sioux, and Ute. Forced removal from their territories and homes has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples can never be undone, we commit to prioritizing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous people in our community and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in an inclusive and culturally sustaining climate. Our labor acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge enslaved people, primarily of African descent, whose labor and suffering built and grew the economy and infrastructure of a nation that refused to recognize the humanity of enslaved individuals, families, and communities. While the 13th Amendment to the Constitution technically ended slavery in the U.S., we know that slavery's ongoing impacts are still felt by countless people forced through violence, threats, and coercion to work in the U.S. We acknowledge that the theft of labor is the theft of generational progress. Nearly all people of color have been robbed of the opportunity and wealth that their ancestors might otherwise have passed on to them. We commit to ensuring that our programs and services center equity and affirm the culture and lived experiences of people from all identities and backgrounds.
Thank you, Michelle. So let's move on to our outcomes for today. In this webinar, participants will explore how open pedagogy moves education from instruction as information sharing to an immersive learning experience where students interact in various in-depth ways. Review how instructors can use renewable assignments, co-created and student-generated content, and open assessments to engage in open pedagogy, and learn about implementing open pedagogy through a culturally responsive lens. So to get an overview of the guides, within all of the guides, you'll find a repeating structure. So they begin with a definition and description of the pedagogy, then research and quotes from founding scholars. Next, a culturally responsive framework to implement open pedagogy or to implement the pedagogy of that guide within the 4 guides. And then instructional strategies that advance equity, benefits to students, instructors, and institutions, and then how digital tools can be used to enhance equity-minded practices. Next, there'll be various examples of how the pedagogy is put into practice, and then resources, pop-outs, and links for added knowledge and context that readers may pursue independently. And next, we'll go into more specifics on each of those sections. So definition, open pedagogy opens a curriculum that doesn't meet students' authentic learning needs when it's closed as opposed to open. Students are encouraged to bring their whole selves to the learning environment. There's a partnership between instructor and student and between peers. Course materials are co-constructed, and there's an abundance of culturally responsive content and curriculum. To continue with the definition on the next slide, the pedagogy of open education is supported by open educational resources, which, due to their licensing properties, are free and allow faculty and students to adopt new course materials and adapt course materials to fit their context. The licensing options are retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. So next in the guide is discusses the founding scholars. For open pedagogy, Rajiv Jangiani and Robin De La Rosa are pioneering scholars of the open pedagogy movement. They value the potential of open pedagogy to increase access to higher education and to allow learners to become co-creators of knowledge. Through this instructional approach, faculty have a broad range of materials to use for implementing culturally responsive instruction, and students are empowered to become agents of their own learning experiences.
So here we have the 5 pillars of our framework that conceptualizes open pedagogy into practice. And this includes scaffolding learning, teaching practices and assignments, creating space for students to develop agency, centering students in the context of learning, faculty, student, and peer-to-peer collaboration, and OER assignments. The framework is cyclical and interconnected while providing practical ways to implement open pedagogy. This approach leverages faculty disciplinary knowledge while modeling for students how to become creators of knowledge through practice, activities, and partnership with their faculty and peers. Outcomes include students creating assignments that have impact on their learning and the field. And then we have our 3 strategies: renewable assignments, co-constructed and student-created content, and open pedagogy. And within these 3 strategies, we then break this down into practical ways of implementing open pedagogy in the classroom. Next in the guide, you will see cause to wonder, pause, and reflect. And with this particular support in the guide, we really wanted to give faculty an opportunity to think about and reflect on their instructional practices, thinking about how they engage students, how they implement culturally responsive teaching and learning practices. And so here we'll see that there'll be a prompt that we have questions that we ask the faculty members to think about. So this one is, how have you used open education resources in your course? But then it goes in depth to think about how are you intentionally doing that in a way that actually increases accessibility and relevance for students. And then this allows faculty and students to work together, again, by reusing, revising, and remixing course content, but also making sure that students and the faculty have the ability to share and discuss course content publicly. And then we have the why and who and how this implementation of open pedagogy benefits students and faculty. And so with students, they're able to assess higher education in a way that they're not experiencing barriers that impede their learning. It also diminishes the cost of textbooks, and then it provides opportunities for them to actually create renewable assignments that reflect their identities and their own lived experiences. And for faculty, this expands the types of resources that are available to faculty, also providing an OER repositories that can be useful for faculty when they're centering diverse perspectives in their course content and curriculum. And then finally, we have digital tools and how that's connected to open pedagogy and OER. And so examples of current digital tools that are being implemented as it relates to renewable assignments, websites, blogs, Google Docs, and then thinking about video editing tools as well: Wikipedia, iMovie, Clipchamp. And then one that I really like is Perusal, where you could actually create a community. You would put up a document, might be an article or something like that, and students actually get to work in that document collaboratively, sharing their feedback with one another. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Michelle, who's going to talk about how to put this into practice.
So as educators, we want to know, how do you incorporate these strategies into our courses? So here we have an example of a list of steps that can be used to guide how the second strategy of having students co-construct and generate course materials can be applied in courses. So reviewing the course design, providing opportunities for students to revise and remix existing course content, exposing students to the disciplinary knowledge needed to lead student-generated assignments, developing formative assessments, and then lastly, gradually releasing responsibility to students more and more as they move them from recipients to active knowledge generators and contributors. These steps can be used to guide students in creating culturally relevant prompts, multiple choice questions for quizzes, or new perspectives to course readings. This How You Do It section exists for each of the strategies presented in each of the guides in this series. These open case studies are an example of co-created content created by faculty and students across departments at the University of British Columbia. They have an open license that allows for the revision and reuse of these cases. If you'd like to take a look at this resource, the link will be placed in the chat. Our next example is a student-authored textbook, and it's an example of student-created content and was written by undergraduate students at Ohio State University who were enrolled in an Introduction to Environmental Science class. The link for this resource will also be placed in the chat. And so these examples are also part of the guide, and not just this guide, but each of the guides. There are all kinds of examples where you can click out and go see and explore further real live assets that exist that exemplify each of the strategies that are being discussed in the guides. Resources, pop-outs, and links. It's got pop-outs and links twice because I guess it's double trouble, right? So each guide in the series, including this one again, has resources, pop-outs, and links, and they take you outside the guide to websites and videos where supplemental information on topics can be found. In this example, this link takes you to a website that describes 6 of the best content creator apps available for students. And so, I mean, the guides are really just a wealth of information, not just from a theoretical perspective, but also from a very practical perspective, and really takes you out again to examples of real life things that are being used by practitioners in the areas of each of the guides. Sarah will now introduce our panelists to discuss some of their real life projects that they have worked on.
Yes, thank you. We're moving into our discussion where our outstanding panelists will respond to some questions and share their faculty exemplars. Thank you so much, April and Joshua, for joining us today. We're all interested in hearing about what you learned and what activities you came up with for open pedagogy in your courses. First, we're going to ask you an intro question. What informed you to transform your courses through an equity-minded and open pedagogy lens?
Josh, did you want to start?
Ladies first.
Okay, sure. What informed me? Well, I'll say starting with this equity-minded and open pedagogy lens, I'd say it's kind of always been there. My career started as a high school teacher, and so just in earning, you know, my teaching certificate, all of that's a part of it. But I'd say it probably really ramped up in the last few years, just becoming familiar with Zaretta Hammond's culturally responsive teaching, and also Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, their work. And then probably in 2019, because, you know, you always want student success. You know, you think about what you wanted and perhaps even some of the things that were lacking when you were a student, and wanting to give students the things that you didn't have, and also wanting to make sure the good things that you have, that they have those things also. So you know, approaching your classes from that standpoint. But then also, when you're not seeing the success that you're working for students, you're reflecting and thinking, what's missing? What am I not doing? What can I improve on? Rather than just writing it off as, hey, the students aren't doing this, that, or the other. And so 4 years ago, I read some colleagues' research about student academic help seeking. And part of their findings had to do with this idea of professorial concern. And it essentially said that the more students perceive that their professor or their instructor exhibits this idea of professorial concern, where professorial concern is defined as students see you as caring about them, not only, you know, as a student in your classroom, but just them as a person. That the instructor is willing to be there to assist them, that the instructor is mindful of their life and their work outside of the classroom. The more that the students feel that the professor, you know, exhibits that, the way the study was written, it says that the less likely students are to avoid help seeking. And we know that students coming to us when they need help is very important to their overall success in our classrooms. And so that really helped me to be even more intentional and look for ways that I could, express this for students to help them see that, I do care about you as a student in my classroom, as a student, as the college, and to look for ways that I could, work with students, look for opportunities to say, yes, I'll work with you, to look for ways to, take out, punitive things like late penalties and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of where I landed with this open pedagogy.
Hey everybody. So April and I are both from Tennessee, and we are in our community colleges are part of what's called the Tennessee Board of Regents system. So we have a shared board at the state level, and so we had an opportunity to be a part of a grant, and that's where April and I first met. We were in a course redevelopment grant. That was focused on open education pedagogy and open education resources. But I began my journey down the equity mindset or developing a more equity focused mindset at Southwest. I was a full-time professor of Spanish at the University of Memphis. But my entire career at the University of Memphis, I had always had more and better professional development at the community college at Southwest than I did at the University of Memphis, because obviously, the community college, the number one thing is teaching, and sometimes research can get some of our other colleagues off of that focus. But I will say that one of the things that there are 4 of us, I think, on the call from Southwest right now: Lake Newton, our QEP director, Raquel Adams, Victoria Jackson Gray. We've all been exposed to something that's part of the Title III grant at Southwest, which is called the Equity and Inclusion Practitioners Program. I'm pretty sure Raquel actually went through it, and I went through the program as well before I came on full time at Southwest, and it really opened my mind. And had we not done the Equity and Inclusion Practitioner Program prior to the OER grant, I don't know that we would have been, and by we, there was a team of 4 of us. All 4 of the Spanish faculty at Southwest were involved in the grant. And I don't know that we would have been we would have been in the right place, but I don't know that we would have been as informed and as ready for what the journey was going to take us on to go through the open education resources grant and pedagogy grant. So I would say that was really key in developing, my becoming more equity minded. And we were actually told, I was just on a call recently with our Department of Education representative for the Title III grant. And she said that in the cohort that we are in, which is the 2019 cohort, so just think about that, it's a 5-year grant, and it's a 2019 cohort. So our first year, you can already see what happened. But she said that within our cohort, we are the most equity minded in our grant. And it is written throughout the grant in multiple ways. For closing equity gaps is a big part of it. It's one of the reasons why our one of our 10 objectives is to have our faculty at 90% trained in equity and inclusion. That's become more difficult in the state of Tennessee recently with the divisive concepts legislation that's passed. But it's something that we are trying to find a way, because so many at the institution have already gone through the process, and I've already seen, we've been in ATD school for a good number of years, and a lot of our colleagues and our administrators have seen what an effect it has to just really be open to understanding what equity is, and being open to the shift in the classroom that happens when the student becomes a collaborator in the classroom.
Thank you for your responses. Let's move on to sharing about your courses. Now April will share on the topic of student-created materials.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So Josh mentioned that, I am here in Tennessee. I am, again, an associate professor of mathematics at Chattanooga State Community College. And shout out to my colleagues who are here, who have joined the meeting. And so, as part of, learning about open pedagogy and being more equity minded, we, two other colleagues of mine applied for the OER grant that Josh mentioned, and we were chosen to be a part of that initiative. And so we decided that we were going to do a redesign of our introductory statistics using OER. And so why we chose that class and our primary goals for that redesign were to increase student success. On our campus, historically, success rates were around 61%. And so students weren't just struggling at Chat State. Digital Promise has done some research, and intro stats has been a challenging course for students nationwide. And so there's been a push to kind of overhaul intro stats and find out what's going on in that course, not just at our institution, but at colleges and universities across the country, because students have just been struggling in that course. So we wanted to improve student success rates. We wanted to close equity gaps. So not only, just overall the success rates are low, when you disaggregate the data, they're even lower for our historically marginalized groups, for our first generation students, for our low income students, and for our students who are coming to us who test below being college level in mathematics, students who would be replaced in remedial courses. Okay, we wanted to improve student engagement, and we wanted to reduce student costs. So those were our big goals for the redesign. And so it's like, okay, well, how are we going to, some might say that's a heavy lift. Like, you want to do a lot, with this redesign, because, any one of those things by themselves, could be, a big challenge. And so we're trying to do all of that with this one redesign, and our courses are only 7 weeks long. Okay, so we said, well, how are we going to start? What's going to be our foundation? And remember, just back in 2019, I found this data on professorial concern. And so my team was on board with, we're going to start at our foundation with this idea of belonging, which to me tied right in with professorial concern, belonging, they go together. And that's this idea of students feeling respected, accepted, included, and supported. So everything we did was around this idea of respecting students, accepting students, including, and being there to support them. Next slide, please. So our big course enhancements. Big course enhancements, we were going to use open ed resources. We were going to make the course feel relevant and real for students by using real world data. We were going to focus on belonging, access, and inclusion. And we were going to make sure our students had transferable skills when they left the course. Skills that were not just unique to being in an intro stats math course, but skills that they could take to other courses, skills that they could take to their job. And so we did that by introducing Canva to students, introducing ChatGPT, showing them, how to work with real data sets. Some of them were from, the local health department. Some of them were from the government data sets. Some of them were from case studies that I found. When it gave them the option to decide what they want to look at, that those topics there of climate change, gun violence, student loans, those were topics that the students chose on their own. I just went out and helped them find, you know, real data on those topics. I redid the syllabus from what we think of as our traditional syllabus to one that was equity minded, using a template that I found from the Center from Urban Equity and some work from USC in California. We worked with Microsoft Excel and specifically, and also Teams. Now we're saying, well, what about low cost? Our school makes Microsoft 365 free for all of our students. So that's why there was no cost for them there. They worked in teams. We replaced our final exam with the group project. They worked in teams of 3. They had the option of choosing their team members. In spring of 23, they chose their topic. I found this case study on online education that I thought was really interesting for them. And they thought so too. So I chose the topic for fall 23 and the first 7 weeks for this semester. And in that, they had to do a research paper, they had to do an Excel analysis, and they also had to do an in-class presentation. And so those were the big changes in the redesigned course compared to the traditional course. Next slide, please. So here, just kind of looking at the different components from their work for the project. All of the students were familiar with PowerPoint or Google Slides. Only about 2 or 3 of my dual enrollment students had ever used Canva. So for one part of the report, I made them create a Canva account, student account, and create an infographic. Okay, so gave them a new free tool that they never used. So there's one of the group's infographic for what was part 4 out of the case study. They had to do a research paper. And after they gave me their rough draft, I had them use GPT to ask for, they had to create a GPT account. Only had a handful of my dual enrollment students who had really engaged with GPT before and already had the account. The rest of them, we took class time to create new accounts, and I had GPT where they were asked GPT to give them 10 suggestions for how to improve the paper, and then they revised their paper based on those suggestions and turn that in. For the actual presentation, they were free to use Canva, PowerPoint, or Google Slides. And then in Excel, they had to take data from the report and do an Excel analysis, create me some pretty charts and graphs that were properly labeled. Some of them did some pivot tables and that sort of thing. And then I have an audio little snippet where you can hear them doing their class recording. I did not include the video because I did not get their permission to show that to you today, but you can hear them, you know, talking in class. Here, a little 30-second clip that Norma is going to play for you.
Group number 6. I'm going to be talking to you today about understanding student engagement with school websites. All right, so first is just going to be a general overview, starting with what's the objective of the study. The objective of our study was to see how school websites are utilized, but the take we kind of took on it was looking more closely at how those school websites could be improved, especially when it comes to students doing online learning. The relevance of the study is kind of showing through numbers how educators and institutions need to adjust websites, making information easier to access and making it a little bit more engaging for students, especially those online. And then our method that was.
All right, so the thing I liked about this presentation, so they had to do the part about looking at school websites, but did you all hear where they said this was the topic, but our take on it was, and so they weren't locked into a box of what they had to get out of or whatever. they had the topic and they were free to look at it, do their own interpretation, and tell what they thought was relevant and why. And then they were about to talk about the method that was used and all that, which was a big statistical topic, but they weren't locked in. And so they were able to go in and say that was just part of it. Hey, what did you get out of it? Why was it meaningful? Why was it relevant for you? And the very first thing they said was, hey, we had this topic and our take on it was this. And that was wonderful. They did exactly what I wanted them, what we wanted them to do. And not just, this was group 6. That's what all of them did as part of the project. Next slide, please.
Group number.
Okay, so when it was all said and done, I participated in Digital Promises stats project, and so they collected some data and stuff for us. So from fall 23, they had the students do some surveys, and they actually specifically asked them about their feelings of belonging. And so that first chart, you can see that all 24 participants answered that they felt like the instructor encouraged them. They all either strongly agreed or somewhat agreed that they feel that they could ask for help, strongly agreed, that they feel respected, agreed, and strongly agreed, and agreed. Did they find value in the course? And so they were asking, would they be able to use what they learned in other courses? That's 96% of them strongly agreed and agreed. Statistic skills will make them more employable. That is 92% of them agreed, strongly agreed. And after this course, would they consider taking another statistics course? And that is 59% of them said they agreed, strongly agreed. I have 13% of them did say that they strongly disagreed, but I mean, they were honest, right? So that's okay. And then for my 3 sections, my 3 pilot sections, the success rates were 88%, 96%, and then 91% for those students, compared to, remember, our historical numbers were around 91%. Next slide, please. And then when we look, remember our goal, our target was our, disaggregated data. We want to not only look at everybody, but we wanted to look at what our institution calls our vulnerable populations. So at the top, we were able to compare our traditional groups, the ones that weren't using the OER, to the redesign sections. And so overall for fall 23, the success rate was 57%. So still right around that 60% that we've been having for years. And the OER, the redesign success rate, was 75%. Now, we do grant that our sample size is much smaller because this was a pilot and it was for the grant. Okay, our ADA registered students, those are students who are registered with our Disability Services Office. So when we're comparing, we move the needle for those students. For our non-traditional age students, when we're comparing, we move the needle for those students. For our Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students, we move the needle for those students. But what I wanted to show is that, sometimes there's this thought that, when you're looking at diversity and equity and inclusion, and you're being very intentional about, our groups on the margin, that somehow that's some zero-sum game, and it means taking away from one group in favor of the other. When we look at our majority population, the things we did that Gloria Ladson Billings would call just good teaching really is just good teaching. And so it didn't take a thing away from those other groups. It moved the needle for the groups that have been suffering for years. and at the same time move the needle for the groups that may not have been suffering or may not have been suffering as badly. The students who weren't registered with disability services, look at their increase. Okay, our younger students, look at their increase. Our white students, look at their increase. So while we were able to help the students who've been overlooked for years, we moved their needle while at the same time move the needle for everybody. Next slide, please. Okay, our first generation students, we move the needle for them while at the same time moving the needle for our non-first generation students. We move the needle for our part-time students who are considered the vulnerable ones, while at the same time moving the needle for the full-time students. Our males, in particular, our Black males, we move the needle for them while at the same time, look at my females killing it. I shouldn't use that. I think that violent language, so killing it is not the right word, so pardon me, but look at them knocking it out the park. Our students who were considered to be academically underprepared, can't stand that term, but that's a phrase that the college uses. We move the needle for them while at the same time helping students who came in at college level. And our last category for our low income or Pell eligible or poverty impacted students, we move the needle for them while at the same time moving the needle for the students who do not fall in that category. So our team feels really, really good about our pilot, and we are looking at, now shifting and running a pilot that would involve co-requisite remediation, because that's the next step for the department. I'm sure I am over my 12 minutes. Do I have one more slide, or was that it?
That's,
Okay, that's it. So
wow,
you
thank
all.
you.
Yeah, thank you all for listening. I'm done. Thank you so much.
Wow, April, thank you for your insight on how you've been implementing open pedagogy. Thank you for your knowledge sharing with regards to equity. I think I speak for all of us. We really appreciated your share. And next, Joshua will share on the topic of open assessment that allows students to take active roles in the assessment process.
Hey everybody. Yeah, so I am an adjunct instructor of Spanish, and on our grant team, it was all four of us who were on the Spanish faculty at that time. So I want to give a shout out to them, to Dustin Williams, who is our chair of the department and also leads the section for Spanish. Pat Ward, Rachel Mixon, and myself were all on the grant, and we all participated in the grant. In fact, Sarah said earlier about open education pedagogy is really about a partnership between the instructor, the student, and colleagues. And so when we were running our pilot as well, and I'll get into the data that's on the screen in a second, but I just wanted to say, while we were running our pilot, one of the things that we did is all four of us took turns covering covering classes. So all of our students in the pilots got to know all of the Spanish faculty. And the idea there was, we were starting something new. Our students, we made them, in the particular sections, which was a section that I taught and a section that Dustin taught. We wanted them to know that all of the faculty, the Spanish faculty, were on the same page. We knew what was going on, and for them to be, to know, to get to know each of us, and for them to be part of the conversation. This was something that as a team we wanted to address, and on the screen you see why. This is data that we collected both as part of our equity and inclusion practitioner program, but then also leading into the OER grant. And we're Spanish teachers, so we are always talking about culture. We're always looking at ways to incorporate and connect with students. If anybody's on the call that's familiar with ACTFL and the 5 C's, that kind of connection with the student is one of the 5 C's. So that was something that was really important to us, and we thought that we were already doing that. We just had never really looked at the data before. not being a general ed course, and even on the grant that I'm on right now, Spanish is not a course that we look at because it's not a high enrollment, high fail course. So basically no one was looking at the data for Spanish. And so when we pulled the data, we were quite embarrassed, because we thought we were doing better. And so when we saw, like you see on the screen there, from our Spanish 1010 students, the semester before we did our pilot, our Spanish 1010 students, when you look at our Black students, in comparison to our white students, these are failure rates. They say success rates, but they're actually failure rates. So sorry. These are, so 40% of our Black students were failing, and 24% of our white students were failing. And then when they moved into Spanish 1020, 46% of our Black students were failing, and 31% of our white students were failing. So like April said, we were also looking for a way to like raise everyone at the same time. And so that's where the discussion, especially that we had with ATD and through the OER grant, really helped open our minds. And on the next slide, we're going to look at something that we took away from the TBR, the grant, and that is the framework for enhancing open and culturally responsive practices provided by SR Education and ATD. This changed everything for us. Okay. And I don't know if Sarah, this might actually be something, Sarah, that if you have a link to it. But this framework, when we started reading through the framework, they introduced it to us at the OER sessions that we went to, and we first started looking at it, and like one of them is the idea of like the teacher, leading the classroom. And of course, we're the ones in the room that speak the language. So we just were like, of course we have to lead the classroom. The students can't lead the classroom. Like that's like, no. But when we started looking at this framework, we started realizing a connection back to what was on the other slide, which is we were not including the voices of the students in the classroom. So when we were developing the courses, when we were doing the assignments in the courses, when we were doing the assessment in the courses, we were not doing it thinking about the experience of the students in the classroom. We came at it with the best intention, and I think that there are so many of our colleagues that definitely are doing what they're doing in their classrooms with the best intention. It's just we just didn't think about it until we had this kind of framework before us to really help us see, wow, we really need to dive in and collaborate with our students. And so we looked at culturally responsive teaching. We looked at one of the things that we looked at, and we're gonna look at that in a second too, but assessing students' prior knowledge, including cultural competency. We looked at how students know, like where have they learned what they learned. That's something, like a lot of times our colleagues, maybe we've done it ourselves, we'll start a class and on the first day, we'll think everyone's on the same page. When in fact, some people don't even have the book, and other people are halfway through the book, right? So that's something where we really needed to have an equity-informed perspective with how we moved forward in the classroom. And one of the ways that we did that was empowering the student to bring their experience and bring their knowledge, and most importantly, their curiosity to the classroom, and for that curiosity to guide what we did in the classroom. And you can see that that's what's in the red box there, is that the instructor gives students choice over how they demonstrate their language. Destin likes to say, everyone needs a way to shine. So in foreign language education, we look at listening, speaking, writing. I'm forgetting one of the fours, but we look at all these factors of communication and cultural competency as well. And certain components of that might be more difficult for students than others. But we shouldn't, we need to praise the students that are doing well in something, so that if they're not doing so well in one of the other components, they aren't dissuaded from trying, from seeing the necessity, because Spanish is not a foreign language. Spanish is a language that your neighbor speaks. So that was really a motivator for a lot of our students, was they really just wanted to be able to have a conversation with someone that they went to school with. On the next slide, we're going to look at what they came in with, right? And so these are from a survey that we did, and a lot of the survey that we did at the beginning of the semester came from that framework that we just looked at. We also used that framework to inform how we made our rubrics for our formative assessments and our summative assessments. And I'll just, I'll say this, and then I'm going to talk about how we did our formative and summative assessments, especially based on what we see right here. So we asked our students who came in, have you ever had to say in a course design? No. Not surprising, right? Again, from that perspective of, well, I'm the one that has the knowledge, so I'm the one that has to impart the knowledge. Did you feel that you had a choice or a voice, a choice, or leadership role? No. Okay, I mean, that lines up with probably a lot of our learning experience. Did you collaborate on how to demonstrate learning? Now, this is good. We were glad to see the numbers, what they are. Obviously, they're not the best for when you compare it in 10-10, but we were glad to see that collaboration is something that is coming from the high schools into the college level. Were you allowed students to drive conversation? This is great. This number right here shows that colleagues across levels in foreign language, especially in Memphis Shelby County schools, are doing what we know we need to do, and that is allow the students to drive the conversation that they're practicing. And an equity mindset just allowed us to kind of really go deeper in what that looks like, and not have it so prescribed from our own experiences. All of us, of the faculty, the 4 faculty members that I mentioned, all of us are white presenting. I'm Hispanic, but I'm white presenting. And so there was a disconnect. All of us, I think, actually think 2 of us are first gen students. And then, we had different roads to college that our students have. And so this really gave us the opportunity to dig in deep and to consider that. Contributed to course materials? No. Well, that's pretty, that's pretty standard for the experience. Learning with the professor. That was very encouraging. And one of the things that we love in that number right there is if you look, learning with the professor, it starts out in 10-10 at 8 people had that experience. But by 10-20, with our faculty, 50 of those students said that they had or that they had contributed to the course materials. So we were really excited to see that. And then investigated real world problems. We see that it's a yes, no experience right there. And so that really became, when you want to talk about motivation, it's the same thing that April was doing. If you want to get a student to be interested in something like statistics or a foreign language, then there has to be some sort of connection. There has to be a motivation. And I think it was the real world problems, like what April did. And in our case, what we did, like what April did, is we allowed the students to guide what that was. And we'll look at the next slide really quickly. So our progressive assessments and our key assessments, all right? So you can see there, obviously within a world language classroom, assessment is going on always. We're always doing an assessment. We're practicing things in class, so formative assessment is always going on. And we gave the students, voice in the formative assessment. A lot of times how we did the formative assessment was completely just like, there would be times that I would say, hey guys, here's like what I would like for us to do. How would you prefer to do it? Would you prefer to do it through a discussion board? Would you prefer to do it in an in-class activity? Would you prefer, like, what would be the best way? And please let me know why. And so that was fantastic, because it usually turned into a class discussion that I was not leading. The students were kind of saying, oh, well, I think this, but this, and then they would come to some kind of consensus. And then on the key assessment, of course, we knew that there were certain things that we needed to assess in order to, ensure program articulation. But what we did is we asked the students how can we do that? I mean, we knew what the possibilities were, but we wanted to ask them, what does that look like? Okay. So that was and I think I have one more slide, and then I'm at my time, I think. Yeah, so this is just one of the formative assessments that it's just one of the simple things, but it's so significant. Okay. And what we did in our OER is we did not oh, thank you for the 5-minute warning. We did not have the students we did not give them vocabulary. We gave them like maybe some vocabulary, but we asked the students to develop their own vocabulary based on what their communicative goals were. And so that was really impressive because it showed us what the students needed and wanted to learn. One of the big things that is a problem with the textbooks in world language, well, in Spanish at least, is that there was not a lot of representation of diversity. Like, for instance, questions about origin were very Eurocentric. Questions about hair descriptions were very Caucasian centric. And so that was obviously a big problem. And we wanted to do something, especially when you're looking at the elementary levels of Spanish, the vocabulary is the building blocks. And so by giving the student control of the building blocks, we were allowing them to help us build the foundation together. And at that, my time is over.
Okay. Thank you so much, Joshua. There's a lot of great information for all of us. Michelle, I'm gonna hand it to you.
Okay. We're going to have our second question here, I believe. So, how did this approach to open pedagogy transform the student experience? And I believe Joshua has to hop out. And so, Professor Crenshaw, if you wouldn't mind providing an answer for this question for us. Thank you, Joshua, so much.
Thank you all.
Sure. Very quickly, I'll just answer that. Students have said that just in their surveys that they felt like they were able to leave the class with transferable skills. One of the last things we did at the end of the class was update resumes. And so they were proud to add, GPT and Canva and Excel in the skills portion of their resume. They added that, our class goal that we repeated pretty much every other day, that we will learn the content and pass the course this semester. And so at the end of the day, when we started with 24 students and we have 22 people still there and passing, they were happy to still see everybody in the classroom there and passing. I mean, they hugged each other and high-fived at the end of presentations on the last day of class, to where, I mean, it just made me feel so warm and fuzzy inside to see the students going up and giving each other real hugs and high fives and all that at the end of the day. And then, as the stat showed, they passed. And so, I mean, for me, it's just, you keep doing it and keep refining it until, I don't know how to get much better than 96%, but there are other things to do that aren't just the raw numbers at the end that can help make it a better experience for students. Because in the other thing, I still had 13% said, you know what, I'm not going to recommend this course, to anybody else. So what was it, in that 13% that still, even though they passed, that still was like, this is still a bad experience for me. So that's my answer to your question.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Ray, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. And thanks to April and Joshua. We really appreciated great strategies and pedagogy that you shared today, and really helping our guest here see how you can put this into practice in real time and do that in a practical way that's very meaningful to your students. And so we are at the close of our session. We will have our final session of putting equity into practice, which will be focused on professional learning. That's going to be next Thursday, April 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, thank you for joining us and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, panelists. For our audience, we ask that you take a few minutes out to complete our survey for today's presentation using the link that we posted in the chat for you. If you've got something else going on immediately after, don't worry. We'll send you the link in a follow-through email in the next couple of days. We encourage you to visit the Every Learner Everywhere website and our resources page, where you can find many of our resources from our partners, including ATD. All of the resources are free to read online or to download. And as Ray mentioned, we want to thank everybody, our panelists, our network partner at ATD, and everyone else for taking time out to be with us today. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.